By midday, mechanic Rolf Wertherick had finished tuning James Dean's new racing Porsche Spyder 550. Jimmy had less than 6 hours to live.
The last time that I saw Jimmy, we sat in a cab and we hugged and we held hands.
It was about a week before he died. It was at the Villa Capri. I remember he was telling me he was going to go to a race soon, and he would call me, and then I didn't hear from him. I didn't hear from him, of course.
We hugged and we kissed, and I walked down, and he was there, and it, you know, like Humphrey Bogart and what's her name, with the mist and the whole thing and the airplanes, and Rick and Elsa or whatever they were, whoever they were. It was very dramatic and really kind of wonderful.
He said, I'm not going to live very long, you know. It was just a certainty that I should probably die before I'm 25. And he said it with such serenity. There wasn't any fear, there wasn't any alarm. It was almost like saying, I'm saying goodbye to you now because I won't be able to say goodbye to you then.
Before he left on his final journey, James Dean had one last thing to take care of. In a nearby diner, he met his father, Winton. They lunched over coffee and donuts. Jimmy was desperate for him to come and see the race, but his father refused. He had rejected his son for the final time.
Your son, Aaron, he's everything that's good.
Say hello to your mother, Aaron.
Say hello to your mother!
Jimmy had had a troubled relationship with his father ever since he abandoned him, aged only 9, shortly after his mother died tragically of cancer.
The father sent the mother in a coffin from California into the Midwest, where she was buried, and he also sent Jimmy with her, and so he lost his mother and his father. Horror, the horror. Can you imagine leaving a 9-year-old boy alone with the love of his life and nobody there with him in terms of parents? It was a cruel kind of thing that really almost was a way of trying to murder him.
So, rejected by his father, Jimmy was raised by his aunt and uncle in Fairmount, Indiana. The loss of his mother had a crushing effect on Jimmy.
I remember him asking me once if she were in her casket and if it snowed on the ground, would she feel the snow or would she hear it? And then he quickly changed the subject, and she left him when he probably needed her. You know, it happens so often. And his father didn't want to bring him up. They just didn't connect.
Back at the garage, Jimmy and his mechanic made last-minute checks. As a racing safety precaution, they fitted a seatbelt to the driver's side, although the coroner noted Dean was not wearing a seatbelt when he crashed. The plan was to load the car onto a trailer and tow it north to Salinas. At some point in the final preparations, someone changed the plan and decided to drive the Porsche to the race. Maybe it was Jimmy, anxious to get behind the wheel. Whoever it was, it proved to be a fatal decision.
We had the car loaded. We filled up the tank on the little wagon that was towing him, and the mechanic was with him, and Rolf, and up and said, I want to drive the car up there. And I says, come on, Jimmy, that's 350 miles. You don't want to drive up there. You want to save the car for the race. No, I want to take it off. So we took the car off. And he said, who is going to go with me? And of course, Rolf put up his hand. I'll go with you. Let's go. I'm a believer that you're destined. when something comes around at a certain period of time, whether it's cancer or whether it's an accident, in this day he could have been just destined, because the car was on the trailer, they were on the road ready to go, and it came off at the last second.
At 2 o'clock on that Friday afternoon, James Dean started off on what would become his final drive. Heading north out of Los Angeles, he chose what he thought would be a safer route for his precious Porsche. He'd become familiar with the highways around LA since moving there from his home in Fairmount. Jimmy had grown up an Indiana farm boy, cared for by his Aunt Hortense and Uncle Marcus, a boy with a passion for motorbikes and acting. It was in June 1949 that 18-year-old Jimmy left home to live with his dental technician father in Los Angeles. Here, he enrolled in the drama department at UCLA.
I met James Dean at UCLA. We were both in the theater arts department. He was a new student and didn't know anyone on campus. He was appearing in Macbeth, and I was working on the production crew of Macbeth, and he was cast as Malcolm, and he was terrible. He couldn't have been worse, and I found myself in the position of sitting in the dark house during the rehearsals, whispering to my co-workers, "Who's the Indiana hick with the terrible accent?"
By 2:30, Jimmy cleared the worst of the LA traffic. Passenger Rolf Wertherick was kept busy lighting endless cigarettes as Jimmy chain-smoked his way into Kern County, happy to leave the pressures of his career far behind. In 1951, Jimmy moved to New York to try his hand on Broadway. There he attended Lee Strasberg's famous Actors Studio, home of method acting. Soon he was being cast in bigger and better stage roles, due partly to his relationship with theatre director Rogers Brackett, a father figure who had a profound influence on his life. It wasn't until Brackett's death and the publication of his memoirs that details of their homosexual affair went public.
I think Rogers Brackett was a kind of a mentor, and took Jimmy under his wing, and it was kind of heady for him, you know. Then he became, I think, more demanding of his time and of his person, and it made Jimmy very uncomfortable and very unhappy.
I didn't know in which way he knew him. I didn't know that until after he died, because I didn't investigate.
When he, using his word, succumbed to him on the train going to Chicago, it bothered him so much that he left Chicago without Rogers and flew to New York.
Jimmy was a victim of the infamous casting couch, selling his body to get work, giving head to get ahead, as they say in Hollywood. But the sexual nature of the revelations in Rogers Brackett's memoirs left many of Jimmy's friends with their illusions shattered.
And it was really only years later that I was told that their relationship had been a sexual one. The part that hurt was feeling that he might have gone along with these relationships for the material and benefits that they would provide. That was crushing. If you're using your sexuality in order to advance your career, that somehow has a very tainted and tawdry aspect that I didn't want to think of him as that.
As Jimmy and Rolf Wertherick sped down the Grapevine, an open and fast stretch of road through the Sierra Madre Hills, Jimmy pushed the car to its limits. Photographer Sanford Roth and racing driver Bill Hickman, following them to the race in a Ford station wagon, struggled to keep up. Both cars were well over the speed limit.
I was working South 99 out of Bakersfield, and I noticed a small sport car coming down the hill at the foot of the Grapevine. Now, my name is Odie Hunter. I was with the Highway Patrol for 31 years, and I gave James Dean a citation for speeding a couple hours or so before he was killed in 1955. About 100 yards or so behind him was a pickup truck towing a trailer, and he was also speeding, seemed to be running together. So I made a U-turn on the highway, it was a freeway, and caught the two of them near Mettler Station, which is 20 miles south of Bakersfield.
Good afternoon.
After success on Broadway, Jimmy started to get regular acting work in New York, first in a series of TV roles. Then came his big break, when he was spotted by Elia Kazan and cast in Hollywood's version of John Steinbeck's East of Eden.
How come you did it?
Did what?
Shot my father.
Because he tried to hold me. He tried to tie me down.
East of Eden was quickly followed by Rebel Without a Cause, the movie that made Jimmy's name as America's first delinquent teenager. The film's themes of juvenile rebellion and a tragic driving accident had an eerie parallel with Dean's own early death. In Hollywood circles, there was a buzz about Jimmy, but to the outside world, he was just another driver going too fast.
Do you have a driver's license I can get a look at, please?
I looked at a driver's license, and it had his name and address on it, which wasn't familiar because that was before his movie career had hit the sky the way it did. But I asked him where he worked. He said Warner Brothers or some movie studio. I forgot who it was.
You some sort of an actor?
I advised him of what he was doing, that he was speeding, and he didn't have any argument about it. He knew that he was. And then he started talking about the car, that they had just got the car in from Germany. Apparently it was working pretty well because it was running real well.
How fast will this car go?
Oh, clocked about 102 to 107 miles per hour.
It's doing over 65, I think around 70. I believe I wrote the ticket for 65.
Okay, Mr. Dean, I'm going to have to give you a citation. If you bear with me, I'll be on the road in just a few minutes. Friday, September 30th, 3:30.
As they drove away, Jimmy probably laughed at the irony of what had just happened. Only 10 days earlier, he'd made a public safety film warning the youth of America about the perils of fast driving.
Jimmy, we probably have a great many young people watching our show tonight, and for their benefit, I'd like your opinion about fast driving on the highway. Do you think it's a good idea?
A good point. I used to fly around quite a bit. You know, I took a lot of unnecessary chances on the highways. And I started racing, and now I drive on the highways, and I'm extra cautious. Because no one knows what they're doing. Half the time, you don't know what this guy's going to do with that one. On a track, there are a lot of men who spend a lot of time developing rules and ways of safety. And I find myself being very cautious on the highway.
Jimmy continued to ignore the speed limit. As he drove west on Highway 466, the Porsche soon left the station wagon far behind. It was shortly before 5 when they pulled into a roadside diner. Jimmy had spotted some race cars in the parking lot and was eager to speak to the drivers. As Jimmy sipped his final soda, he bragged to his fellow racers that he'd managed to get his Porsche up to 130 miles per hour. He was in a light-hearted mood as he joked that the tabloids would have a field day if they ever found out about his speeding ticket.
He had a great sense of humor. You know, it depends upon what your sense of humor is, whether you appreciated his humor or not, but he, you know, he loved a good laugh and was a prankster as well.
He would remove his bridge, and he was toothless. And it was the most shocking thing, because here was this wonderful face and handsome, and then he would take out the teeth.
And putting them in people's drinks when they weren't looking. And they'd look in their drink and they'd pick it up, and my God, and people would scream, and the louder you screamed, the more he'd laugh. He loved to do that.
I set up this mock orgy that would look like we were having this orgy, but really wasn't at all. He came over, and it looked like this one was in this corner, two people were in a bed, nothing was happening, and he stood in the middle of the floor, unzipped himself, and proceeded to masturbate.
Dizzy broke into hysterical laughter and thought it was one of the funniest things she's ever seen, and he stomped out. I think more in embarrassment that she had laughed than in anything else.
I said, Jimmy, I met a lady today who knows you. She said that you were naked on the set at Warner Brothers. She said I was. I said, why? You were? He said, yeah. I was in my dressing room changing clothes. I didn't have anything on, and all of a sudden this guy walked in. He said it was my wardrobe man. But I said, "Ew!" And I screamed, and I ran out, and I said, there's a man in my dressing room. And nobody laughed.
He was emulating Marlon Brando, and Brando at the time was the great naughty boy of theater and film. And Dean was determined to out-Brando Brando. Ella Logan gave a party one time where he whipped out his cock and peed into a glass of, I guess it was scotch or something, in front of everybody. And no one thought it was funny. No one thought it was funny.
It was 5:30 when Jimmy left the diner and drove off into what was to be his final drive into immortality. The sun was getting low in the sky as the silver-grey Porsche continued west on Highway 466. There was little traffic on the roads that afternoon, but those witnesses that saw the Porsche all agree it was traveling fast. One person who claimed he did not see the Porsche was crucial to the events of the next few seconds. Donald Turnipseed, a 23-year-old student. At 5:45 p.m., he reached the junction that joins Highways 41 to 466. As he pulled into the center of the road to make a left turn, he paused momentarily, then continued straight across the oncoming lane. Jimmy saw the car pause, then move across directly in front of him. As Turnipseed pulled forward, Jimmy said his final words to Rolf Wertherich, "That guy's got to see us. He's got to stop." A split second later, Jimmy realized Turnipseed wasn't going to stop. Another split second, and Jimmy was frantically attempting to swerve around the car that was now on a collision course.